Today I want to talk about the Luciferian satanic nature of feminism. A lot of people think of feminism as a political movement, as some sort of movement for equality, but really the whole presuppositions of equality and equalitarianism might themselves be the problem. In other words, we might have senses in a philosophical sense in which people are equal. There might be other senses in which they're also unequal. So maybe both things are the case. And you'll notice in a lot of political movements that are based around Hegelian dialectics and getting people divided, they will trade on everything being one kind of distinction, right? We're all either absolutely identical and the same in some kind of monoculture, or it's unfair and everyone is oppressed in this sort of totem pole Olympics of oppression, right? And I noticed I was watching a debate with Pearl and a bunch of feminists the other day, and Pearl made the point that feminism just trades on this sort of equality narrative, which isn't really justified. And all of the people in the audience were then basically going into debating. They were going into proving how they were more oppressed than the other person. And so it was like a domino effect of like oppression to see who was the most oppressed. And that somehow became the primary special specimen, the most, like the top of the totem pole, but it was always like the most degenerate thing. They're like the most like lesbian Buffalo Bill, Muslim Jeffrey Dahmer is like the highest totem, like the top of the totem pole. So how is it that this is the highest level of most oppressed, but now the most revered? And to me, that suggests that all of this is inversion. And my guest, Brittany Sellner, is going to be joining me here because I want to talk to her. She's a great activist, a great YouTuber, podcaster who covers a lot of these topics from a traditional conservative perspective, as a mom, as a homemaker, and as somebody who kind of saw all of this occurring in the internet sphere. I want to kick off this conversation with what's said in Genesis. You know, God says when the fall happens to the woman, everybody sort of shares blame here, you'll notice, right? So it's not like it's all the man's fault. It's not all the woman's fault. Everybody kind of has a degree of blame here. And it says to the woman, I will multiply your pain in childbirthing, and your desire shall be for your husband, but he will rule over you. In other words, the desire as a result of the fall, the fallen desire of the woman will be to kind of rule, to be in the position that a man has, to be this kind of patriarchal type of position. But God says it will not be the case, and actually the man will have the authority, the man will rule. So there's this inherent desire for the feminist to basically initiate revolution that begins in Genesis, actually. Genesis is actually telling us about the origins of feminism. I mean, that's not all it's talking about, but there's that nugget of wisdom there. And so when we come back from this break, we're going to get more into this topic with Brittany Sellner. Again, I would say check out her YouTube channel because she has a lot of videos where she breaks a lot of this down from her perspective as a traditional conservative. And she notes how social media is really engineered, to give this narcissistic dopamine hit, especially to women, and especially a lot of areas like Instagram, these kinds of things that really addict women to the dopamine hit that they're getting from 1,000 simps, but not from a husband, you see. So this is all engineered to replace the attention and the nurturing and the dopamine that a husband would give to a wife. Now that's being replaced with all this internet stuff. And that's, I think, by design. And when we come back from this break, we're going to get into this conversation with her and see what she, and on my Rockfin under the name Jay Dyer, and on Twitter. And do we have Brittany with us? Brittany, welcome to the fourth hour of the Alex Jones Show. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since I've been on the show. I think it was 2018 the last time.
Oh, okay, cool. I wasn't sure if you were on. Glad to have you here. So you do a lot of work in terms of exposing the problems in the culture, promoting the traditional conservative attitudes towards marriage and family life. Let's talk about you and your situation, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about the problems that you've had with your husband and the trials that he's had.
Yeah, sure. I mean, which did you want to talk about first? That or feminism?
Tell us about you, and then we'll get into your husband, and then we'll get into some of the issues.
Okay, sure. So I'm an author and a conservative activist and commentator. I've been on YouTube and Twitter since 2016. I first started during the Trump's presidential election. And since then, I've been through a lot, so much so that I actually wrote a book about it, because half of the things you probably wouldn't believe. But I mean, it's more common now. You see what they're doing to Trump even. He was just arrested. So the lengths to which they'll go to persecute people that they think are politically effective and they're in ideological conflict with them, these lengths are really great. So my husband and I have certainly been through a lot. He is an Austrian activist, and he's very well known in the Germanosphere in Germany and Austria, not so much in the English-speaking world, at least not anymore. That was more between 2016 and 2018 or 19. So I think it will take quite a while to get into all of the things that we've been through. But I mean, just to list off, we've had multiple house raids, investigations. We were banned from the UK. I'm sure maybe some people will remember this. We were detained and imprisoned for a few days. Same with Lauren Southern back in 2018, and then deported and banned from the UK. So it's definitely been a wild ride. Things have settled down a little over the past 1 or 2 years, but of course the attacks just keep coming. It's just smaller things, at least for now. I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah, and I think you had recently a situation where there was something to do with an internet comment, right? And to me, this blows my mind that, people will comb through and find something on social media, not just to get people deplatformed, but rather to actually try to get criminal prosecution in the EU. Is that right?
Right. There is no free speech in Austria. They say there's free speech in the Constitution, just not hate speech. And hate speech, as we've seen, is completely subjective. And because we live in a very system based on anarcho-tyranny, they have, of course, the ability to go after people equally, but they only go after specific people who are their political opponents. So they'll go very hard on these people. And then, for example, as you saw in the US, the Black Lives Matter riots, and people are killing each other, burning down things. Those people were just barely any of them were put in prison. As for the J6 people, they're all getting 18 to 25 years, even if they didn't commit any violence and barely did anything at all. So you just see a huge disconnect there, a completely different way in which people are treated. And this is how most of the Western world is nowadays, unfortunately.
And would you attribute that to ultimately sort of the degradation in culture that leads back to something spiritual? I mean, is that your ultimate source, even beyond the political, in other words?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think this is a political war. I think it's a spiritual war. I'm traditional Catholic. I was raised traditional Catholic. My husband is as well. And if you look at it through that lens, I think it makes perfect sense, much more than politically. Yeah.
One of my friends, Rachel Wilson, she wrote a book about the occult roots of feminism, and it reminded me of a podcast that I heard in an interview with Dr. Edward Dutton, and he was discussing from an evolutionary psychology perspective the history of witchcraft. And so it's interesting that two different vantage points, one coming from kind of a scientific perspective, another vantage point coming from a religious, spiritual perspective. They're both coming to the same conclusion that when we look at things like the rise of witchcraft and the occult, the history of that signifies people who were kind of marginalized or people who were on the outskirts, then sort of using that victim status to not get necessarily their own rights per se, but actually to upend and change the whole of society. And to me, this speaks to kind of, it's similar to what you see with like fat acceptance and these kinds of movements. It's like people have a conscience, in my view. And their conscience like eats at what they're doing, right? Telling them that it's wrong. And their approach is, no, it's society that is wrong and society needs to change, not me. And I think that, you've done a lot of work in your videos pointing out how actually social media, these kinds of things, are pushing the narcissism that reinforces the idea that, no, you're okay, be you, you are you. You don't ever need to change or be better. And this actually is a technique to destroy society.
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about it, feminism and Christianity, for example, they are clearly in stark conflict with one another. But we do have this inherent built-in need to worship something. So these feminists, a lot of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them are naturally drawn to what complements their ideology. Witchcraft, or I think better said, Satanism, it's very blatantly complementary with feminism because it's based off a worship of oneself and essentially doing what thou wilt. So you are the God, you are the independent, self-sufficient, empowered woman who doesn't need anybody else, and you deserve your own page in the history books due to the mere fact that you're a woman. You don't even necessarily have to do anything great. And it's not to say, again, that all feminists are like this, but it does make perfect sense to me when you look at it that way.
Yeah, in one of your videos, you were talking about, this idea that you are great because you're you, and it's like, well, but have you done anything great? like, why are you great just because you're? I mean, maybe there is a kind of a dignity, but I mean, is that kind of what social media is reinforcing? This idea that you are good, you are great, you're a goddess, no matter what you do, even if you're completely wicked, gluttonous, and destructive.
Yeah, I do think all humans, of course, there is dignity there, but you have to earn respect. You aren't just owed it. And people have this attitude wherein everybody just owes respect to absolutely everything and anything that you do. But you also have to remember that a lot of people, especially if you're doing something blatantly immoral and corrupting children, trying to trans children, we're not going to respect you. We're not going to agree with you. We're going to stand up against you. Tolerance is in many ways quite evil. It can be good for some things, but just to use it, yeah.
When you get sort of these women activists and these people, these feminists who are sort of seeking for female empowerment and all this stuff, how would you respond to the people that say, well, we're just looking for equality and empowerment? Why do you have a problem with, why are you working against women as a woman when we're just seeking empowerment and equality?
Well, there's a couple things I was thinking as you did your intro. A lot of thoughts came to mind kind of explaining why women are so drawn to feminism. I think feminism has certainly lost a lot of its adherents in recent years, but it does make sense why so many women were and still are drawn to feminism, because when you have a society where there's no order based on truth and morality that gives men and women their proper place, then a disorder is naturally created and things devolve into ego, individualism, and a superficial purpose motivated by attaining basically the most pleasure, joy, and comfort. So it becomes about what you can acquire for yourselves, and what you can acquire for yourself, which becomes obviously a battle for power and resources. And naturally, since we can't fight this battle effectively just on our own,
hold that thought right there, because we have to go to the commercial break. So hold that live in Los Angeles as we'll be performing at a live 5-hour event at the Van Nuys Airport in the hangar with Jamie Kennedy. You know who Jamie Kennedy is. He's a brilliant comedian, one of the best comedy shows of all time, the Jamie Kennedy Experiment. He'll be doing stand-up. I'll be doing some of my own so-called stand-up and impressions. Also be doing a talk on my most recent book, Meta-Narratives, The Philosophy of Symbolism. And my wife will be doing a presentation on Hollywood and film symbolism. So it's going to be a lot of fun. You can get your book signed. You can learn, get your learn on, and get those tickets. If you head over to my website, over to my Twitter, you'll see those are pinned, and you can get that locked in before it's no longer available. So we were talking with Brittany about the roots of feminism, and by the way, I forgot to go into the ancient goddess worship and all the crazy cults in the ancient world. It's almost like they're bringing back a lot of these ancient goddess cults. And I noticed that some of those cults were basically centered around the most degenerate practices. I mean, I'm not stuff I can't name on air, but I mean, stuff involving bodily fluids and actually castrating and changing your biology. So a lot of these ancient Mesopotamian and cults in Babylon and so forth, they were really into these nasty, disgusting practices. And one thing that people don't know is that the social engineers, people, for example, at Tavistock Institute, who have most recently been pushing the gender ideology and changing your gender, those people actually have studied to a very precise degree ancient history. And so, for example, Tavistock, in its earliest days, they studied Spengler's Decline of the West. And what Spengler posits is that, civilizations have a life cycle, a birth cycle, life cycle, apex, and then a death cycle. And he notices this for a lot of, ancient civilizations or empires. And although Spengler wasn't writing about how to destroy the West, he did at times discuss the possibility of the West declining and being destroyed from within through certain factors like what we're talking about. And one of those key factors is attacking the fundamental building blocks of society, like the family. You can't have a society getting rid of the family. And so many of today's technocrats are so deluded and insane, they think, no, we can just create babies out of test tubes. We don't need moms and dads anymore. We'll get rid of all that, and we'll just engineer a future post-human society that is the next phase of evolution. But none of this could have happened, not even the trans stuff, without feminism. Feminism is the predecessor in terms of the modern West, right? We'll go back to, say, the French Revolution. Do you agree with that assessment that it's all sort of this victimhood narrative that women have been oppressed by being moms and by being, being in the household?
For sure. I mean, it's very obviously, as you alluded to before, it's a form of Marxism because it's based on the haves and the have-nots. And if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in a natural moral order, and that people have their various roles in life, that they live out to the best of their ability in order to, of course, merit heaven, then this world is basically all there is. That's the best it's going to get. There's nothing else. So it makes total sense that these people believe that everyone should then receive things equally, things that bring you the most pleasure, joy, and happiness. Because suffering, God forbid, and being a victim, these are the absolute worst possible things you can endure because there is no higher purpose and there's nothing for us to merit through these things. So I think, it's quite not a surprise.
It's weird, too, because there's a mix of all kinds of weird philosophies in this, whatever we're in today, old classic Marxism, which I'm not a fan of at all. But the odd part is like they weren't into any of the, rainbow stuff. They weren't into Skittles stuff. And all of the famous Marxists actually have these really derogatory statements about, homosexuality. And even the old Soviet party was like, they weren't for a lot of these things. So it's weird to me that Marxism eventually shifted away from, or what we call Marxism in terms of like academia, it's shifted into this weird postmodern thing where everything is a social construct. To me, it's just very bizarre. It's almost magical thinking.
Mm-hmm. I do think it was predictable, though, because when the most persecuted and victimized group deserves the most and receives the most, then it's naturally going to devolve into intersectionality, because it's like that saying, I think it goes like the revolution always kills its children. The feminists, they used to be the biggest victims. Then it was, it got very racial, and now it's the trans people. So there's so much to gain from being a victim. And if you're part of too large of a group, then you're going to receive less. So might as well become more and more intersectional and break it up as much as possible, because then you get more.
Yeah, and then the next victim has to be the most fringe, the next level of oppressed, right? So now it'll be the pedophiles, right? Oh no, we're the really top of the totem pole oppressed people. But the irony is that all of this is really just the most wicked.
Yeah.
Well, and what is inversion but what Satan does, right, to what is an order that's in nature that God established, right? So what does Satan do? He attempts to put in place an inversion of that, like the reverse of that, right?
Exactly. Well, evil, I think evil can be best defined as so God created, of course, a moral order, and this is the absence of the moral order. So everything that goes against it and is an inversion of it. That's why you even see in Satanism, their black mass is just an inversion of the mass, like the real mass. So they have to invert everything. Men become women, women become men. We not even having children correctly anymore. They want to have it artificially done. Everything is an inversion. And this, of course, is evil.
Yeah, and I remember in Brave New World afterwards, when Huxley was writing about what's in there in regard to child rearing, he said that the people the circles that he was in realized that one of the ways to get rid of private property, to get rid of inheritance, and to get rid of the classical notions of how we organize society would be to, if you have test tube babies, it's not just a matter of mad science experiments. It's also a way to destroy the family, because a test tube baby doesn't have any allegiance. It doesn't have a mom or a dad that it has allegiance to. It only has allegiance to the scientist and the lab code that created it, right? So this is so crucial for this revolution that they have, this new order, right, based around this stuff, to destroy the family. And again, none of that could have happened without the revolution of feminism. And I don't know if you know this, but did you know that you can go all the way back to Plato's Republic, and he was arguing for the total equality of men and women?
No, I didn't know that. I did read Plato's Republic, but to be fair, it was like in 2012 or 13. So it's been a while.
Well, he's the father of the revolution of equality, right? So he actually thinks that for the guardian class, because some women can fight pretty good, right? They can be in the UFC or whatever. Then, therefore, all the women are equal to men potentially, right? So they should, in that class, have everything in common, including children, including husbands and wives, right? So that's sort of proto-communism, is actually the guardian class of Plato's Republic. But if you look at the French revolutionaries, they would pull from Plato and say, look, this is the ideal society that we're going to instantiate. So I'm curious, it seems like a lot of this stuff is based on false utopianism, whether it's Marxism or whether it's today's technocracy or whether it's whatever it is. It's almost like everyone thinks that we can just instantiate this perfectly fair society. Why do you think that's impossible?
I think a lot of people believe it because they fundamentally misunderstand human nature. They also don't believe in hierarchy. These types of things you would believe in if you believe in God. We all have our specific roles. Of course, our souls are equal, but our roles in life are not. And I think people, they don't believe in anything after this life. So it makes perfect sense that they're striving for some sort of utopian world on this earth, because what else do they have? They're probably they're probably going through existential crises every day, thinking that there's nothing after this. So I think it's so common, leftism, even some people on the right, that have this utopian vision. It's never going to manifest, and they almost always result in genocide.
Yeah, because when the society isn't matching up to the ideal that's constructed, right? The problem is you're the problem. So get rid of you, and then we can finally
there
have
has to
this.
Be a
Don't go anywhere. This is
yeah, and they'll always find it and persecute them.
Covering the pretty wild video. I didn't realize until recently that Brittany had actually made a video on the video that I'm talking about. And so her video is the craziest feminist vice debate. And it just happened to be the video that I was covering in my stream a couple nights ago, where there was this panel of these wild feminists and Pearl there going back and forth with them. And I never heard this term pretty privilege. I didn't know that was a thing. And it's just weird to me that, again, it's making the point that I'm making about how there's always like another level of which, I don't have to listen to what you're saying because I can find a thing in you that you have that discounts what you're saying because of a privilege narrative. So it's this oppression narrative. This video that you did, tell us about this, because I think this illustrates what we're talking about here. What was this debate and what did you think of it?
Well, they covered a lot of various topics, but one of the most fascinating things about the interview, in my opinion, was how much these women did not like each other. Feminism is supposed to be about uniting women, fighting for all of women's rights, this, that, and the other thing. They do not like each other because, as I said before, when there's no moral order in a society based on truth, that's putting men and women in their rightful place, the goal becomes comfort and pleasure. It all devolves into your own ego. What can you personally gain from all of this? Everything that you can get, power and resources, basically. And so when you can't fight effectively on your own, because we can't as individuals, you of course are drawn to joining forming certain alliances. And these alliances are of course beneficial to your goal to get the most power, resources, and most joy out of life. And these alliances are often, as we see, built across these lines of gender and ethnicity and so on. But as I said, it's devolved into intersectionality because feminism was just too big. There were too many women to get too many things. So it has to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Who's ableist? Who is uglier than somebody else? These people are more victims. So what can I get out of this? It's all completely egotistical. It's them just wanting to receive things not based on merit, but because of their disability, how ugly they are, their race, whatever it might be. Because in a society now, it doesn't matter what you do and what you merit. There is no kind of honor and glory placed on this. It is based on just what you inherently are, your disability or race or your gender. So of course people see this and they want to gain the most that they possibly can, and so they of course join it, the feminism, and then it becomes more intersectional over time.
Yeah, I remember I was reading a thing about a woman who was a professor at a university some years back, and she had supposedly discovered a missing Gnostic gospel or something to this effect, and it had to do with how the real message of the Gospels, the New Testament, the Bible, was this secret sort of Gnostic feminist Pistis Sophia message. And it turned out that her discovery and the stuff that she was pushing was actually fraudulent, right? And when she was confronted about this, she said, well, it doesn't matter that it was fraudulent because everything ultimately is power narratives. There's no such thing as truth anyway. So if I could come up with a fraudulent Gnostic gospel that let my group win in the end, it would have been fine. So it was this weird justification of this because there's not anything right or wrong. It's all power struggles and power narrative anyway. So a lot of people, I think, on the right, they're interacting with and they're thinking about things in terms of the true and the false. But the people that you're interacting with and debating with, as I saw on that panel there, they don't believe in true and false. Everything for them is a power struggle. And so if you come on and you have a better argument, I don't have to listen to what you're saying because you're pretty privileged. To me, that's just bizarre. It's insane to me. That it's like, what? This is so mind-blowing to me.
To be fair, I do think that pretty privilege exists to an extent. Just you can look at on Instagram and a pretty woman will get, million to 10 million followers. So that certainly exists, but life is just unfair. Not everyone's going to look completely equal. Not everyone's going to have the same abilities of strength, intelligence, humor. We're all different and we just have to accept this. But a lot of people can't, of course.
Right. But what I'm saying is that that there's not advantages that people can have because they're attractive or talented. Sure. But what I'm saying is that the modus operandi of the portly woman there was, I don't have to listen to what you're saying because you're pretty privileged. In other words, I can find a trait that you have that negates anything that you say. And so it's not about the true or the false. It's actually about who has the upper hand in the power dynamics. And that's a common thing amongst Marxists and then postmodernists is that everything is a power dynamic. And so I can be justified in being completely immoral because everything is immoral power struggle anyway, right?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Absolutely correct. And I've been thinking lately, I was having this discussion with my husband. I asked him, why do you think feminism has been allowed to thrive and be promoted in the way it has? And I think he gave a very interesting response. He essentially said, it's not that the people in power love women and want what's best for us. Not at all. It's that we're easier to control. The absolute most dangerous thing that threatens the power of the people in control are young men. Every single revolution was led by young men. So it makes perfect sense that those in power, they're doing their best to castrate and emasculate men in every conceivable way, physically, intellectually, spiritually, you name it. So I thought that was very interesting and it made a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, men are the beings who are tasked with setting boundaries. And as my buddy David Patrick Harry is always noting, a lot of today's revolution is premised on the notion that there are no boundaries at all. You can be and become anything that you want. If you want to identify as a attack helicopter one day, you can identify as a woman the next day and a man the third day. You can literally be anything that you want, but that's not true. In fact, the notion of God the Father actually inherently within it sets boundaries. That means that God has certain characteristics and attributes. It doesn't mean he's literally a biological male per se, although Christ is a biological male. But God the Father sets boundaries. So there's a natural order of patriarchy of logos there that can't be destroyed because human beings would like to create a different kind of world, or because fallen human beings are sort of inherently rebelling against that order. And then all of modernity is based around this idea of removing all boundaries and all order and all structure, which is impossible. Right. And the irony, I think you would agree, and I think this is one of the reasons Jordan Peterson is really popular in part, is that he's pointed out that even if you're not religious, doesn't the natural world itself contain hierarchy within it? And, we've been told for the last 150 years that, we're just sophisticated monkeys anyway. But animals have a structure. The animals have hierarchy. So how is it that we're going to have a perfect order when even the natural world itself doesn't have a total equalitarianism? It seems insane to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, people nowadays no longer respect any sort of authority. Their authority is themselves. What I want, what makes me happy. It's like kill the police. We shouldn't have government. We shouldn't listen to our teachers. You see some of these crazy videos of just students nowadays attacking their teachers. It's getting really common. Right. Or their parents. You see these kids on TikTok just absolutely ripping their parents apart, saying terrible things about them. There is no more a respect for authority because people believe in this equality where I don't have to respect them. I don't have to honor my father, my mother, or any authority for that matter. And so it's a complete rebellion against God's natural order. And of course, that's why it's resulting in chaos and all of this horrific nightmare stuff that we're seeing nowadays.
Now, somebody coming from a perspective who I think, when we talked in other interviews, you said that you never really had a wild sort of feminist phase. And so you weren't brainwashed in the university where a lot of young girls are. And I'm curious, what has been your experience? What would you say to girls out there who are being told, live for you, lean in, slay queen, don't have babies, don't get married, don't have a husband? What would you say to those girls, given the fact that you have chosen the wiser route?
I would say to them, I think I understand why a lot of people take this route, and it is a result of a lot of propaganda and the fact that our society has been kind of restructured in a way that makes it extremely difficult to get married and have children. By that, there are myriad reasons. You can't support a family on one income. It's very difficult. There's no longer a sense of community. There's in kindergartens, them teaching LGBT stuff to your kids, trying to trans their kids. There's so many pitfalls and so much to look out for. But we've seen it time and time again, the women that choose to just stay single forever, don't get married, don't have kids. I think some of them turn out all right and are happy because that was the path they were supposed to walk. But for the most part, women end up miserable. Women are, I think in the past 10, 20 years, the antidepressant rate has risen like 65%. Women are no longer happy with this path that the society is saying is the one that's going to make you happy. Well, so I would say explore the other side and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Real quick, before we head out, where can people get your books?
My book's on my website, Brittany Sellner.